Hey everyone, we're going to try something a little different for this video and maybe some videos going forward. I've had some requests over the years for some guides for fan editing, just tips and tricks, things that I've used to make my edits better or make them work. And we're going to give that a go, see if these videos can help some people. So just for a little background, for me, I wouldn't call myself a professional editor, but I've been paid for editing in the past. And so just so everyone knows, my videos are going to be mostly coming through Davinci Resolve. But with that said, anything I'm doing here, you should be able to accomplish in some capacity on any other decent nonlinear editing software. And over the years, I've used Premiere Pro, I've used Final Cut 7, I've used Avid Media Composer, and so I'm familiar with all the other ones. Been a while since I've used some of them, but they would all have the tools needed to do the majority of what I'm doing here. You just might need to look into some specifics about where those tools are, what the shortcuts are, things like that. But otherwise, if you're just starting out in fan editing, I'm going to throw out a suggestion that heavily consider just jumping right into Davinci Resolve. It's free to download and try, and really, until you hit some higher level features on it, you're not even going to really notice that you don't have the paid version of it. Maybe your school or your work is providing you with Premiere Pro or Final Cut X, or you own one of those. Although, all of the Adobe software now is on subscription, and that's kind of why I moved away from it. Since I'm basically a hobbyist now, to me it just made more sense. Hey, I can give Blackmagic $300 for a piece of hardware. Actually, I bought their speed editor to just help a little with ergonomics and some of those sort of common functions. And it came with the studio license. So that's a one-time purchase versus paying hundreds of dollars for some of these pieces of software. Final Cut X, if you have it, I think could do great things too. I just have never really used the software that much. My last experience was with Final Cut 7. So again, whatever tool you have, you can make it work. And that's kind of the exciting thing about fan editing. It's not like these days it's so easy between hardware and software to at least get started. And it's just when you start trying to push the limits a little bit that you might need some better tools under your belt. But definitely encourage you to just jump in. And like I said, if you're not committed to a particular editing software at this point, Davinci Resolve, amazing for literally no money. Well, let's get started. I want to just talk about today. One of the things that I've seen a lot of editors are sort of jumping into open matte footage. When they shot a movie on film, they cropped it for sort of the intended display in theaters, which is CinemaScope, super wide image, but they also shot footage that was a little more vertical. And sometimes that was intentional, and sometimes that was used for full screen DVDs or VHSs, even if you go further back. Sometimes it was used for TV versions of the movies or on airplanes or things like that, were alternate versions. And so there are a lot of movies out there, particularly from 80s through early 2000s, maybe middle 2000s, that have these open matte version. I'm just going to show you an example of, it's the only project I've actually done this with, but to me it made a lot of sense. The Watchmen from 2009 had what you could call matte footage. They actually called it IMAX. They had specific scenes that were shot for an IMAX experience, and it wasn't really IMAX. They didn't really shoot it with IMAX cameras, but it did have that extra height to the footage. And I remember this being, and somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think this was a very early movie where they promoted sort of this IMAX experience. Now you have tons of movies coming out that are shot for IMAX or, displayed in IMAX. And, whether it's real IMAX or not, it's at least a sort of alternate experience for the movies. So with this, I was already doing this edit to sort of change the ending to make it more in line with the comic, and I was cutting back in the footage from this featurette called Under the Hood, which is basically sort of a 60 minutes interview series. I sort of cut in as this real in-world interview. So you can see here, I'm already playing around with aspect ratios in it. This is sort of the standard, CinemaScope look that the Blu-ray that I have has. So very widescreen, but then you've got this footage that's, 4:3, sort of traditional TV look. And then you've got this footage that I'll try to grab maybe a decently bright, that's all right. This footage that's what they're, calling this IMAX sort of footage. And really, here's what I'll do. I'm going to sort of shut off the Blu-ray sort of added footage, and you can see, maybe if I can find a better portion of a clip. Ooh, that's not bad. So you can actually see in the corners that they've sort of combined what would be, not a 4:3 image exactly, but the footage actually for the IMAX portion or the open map portion actually ends sort of before the edges. And then they took somewhat of the Blu-ray footage to fill in these gaps, and the corners are actually open. And that's something you commonly find for open matte. If you want to sort of maximize the available footage, you're going to have these sort of blank corners. And so the version that I was able to find basically did some sort of, out of focus doubling of footage. They took the nearest sort of frames, maybe from right here or from above it, and filled that in and sort of did a blur on it. And I was a little selective. There were some sections of the movie where I found it a little distracting, and so I didn't use those. But for the majority of it, it really kind of works. It doesn't, if you're paying attention just to what the action is on the screen, it's not really too much to get bothered by. But we'll put this back in, and so you'll see when that gets layered back in, the Blu-ray footage that I have is much higher quality. And I can show you here the footage from this, this hybrid cut, this sort of hybrid aspect ratio cut. It was only 1280 by 720. That was the highest quality footage I could find. And it's fine. What I ended up actually doing was, and again, this is something that's specific to the Resolve paid version, but they have this Superscale feature. Again, you can find this in other software. Topaz is I think the sort of best known one, but there's other pieces of software that can do this sort of scaling footage and, creating new pixels that would make it look close to an increased resolution. And so in this case, Resolve has this Superscale 2x enhanced. It's sort of their, GPU assisted version. It's pretty limited for what you can do. You can adjust the sharpness a bit, noise reduction a bit. In this case, because the only footage that is going to be seen is sort of the bottom and the top, I wasn't too worried about settings. It's mostly just sort of creating that, that sense of height for the footage. So I just sort of left it on the default values, but ended up scaling 2x in this case. It's a little bit misleading, but 2x from 720p actually means it's going to scale it to 1080p. And so 2x from 1080p goes to 4K. So just as a sort of reference, it's not super specific. You can sort of look into the documentation. It'll tell you exactly what it's going to do from various footage resolutions. And so did that sort of 2x to get it to the same resolution as the Blu-ray footage. And so what I did to make the most of the Blu-ray footage and basically just make the quality as high as I could, I'll select the Blu-ray footage. And you can see I had to reposition it slightly. So I went to 40. You can see it, at the default position, it wasn't exactly matched up with the matte footage. And so clearly they made a specific crop of that for what they wanted for the sort of CinemaScope. So we'll get that back to 40. Maybe we'll just type that in. There we go. And, there's our nice matchup. And you obviously on a bigger screen, you'd be able to tell there's significantly more detail in the Blu-ray footage. And so there's the reason that I'm sort of layering it. You can see it here. I've got this, the top layer, and then anytime I'm adding in matte footage or something else, it's this bottom layer here, or the sort of video 1 versus video 2. So beyond that, for the Blu-ray footage, any Blu-ray footage that you grab, like if you rip it straight from the Blu-ray, it's going to have the sort of letterbox bars baked in, those black bars at the top and bottom. So the first thing I did was actually cropped those out, and I actually cropped just a few pixels more than what I would have needed. The reason being, I wanted there to be a seamless transition between the Blu-ray footage and the footage that was from this sort of matte hybrid aspect ratio source. So in this case, I just added this little softness layer, and that was an option for the crop here. And what that basically does is just, you can sort of see, oh, hey, there's that softness. And it's just creating this more seamless transition between the bits of footage. So I'm going to undo that. And so for me, it was just -5 sort of created this just a little bit of layer. On other programs, you might see it described as feathering or something else, but it basically just means sort of creating this, instead of a hard line, it becomes a sort of softer line, and then the two pieces of footage just end up blending together a bit. So that was for the crop there. You can see top and bottom, and then that softness. I didn't end up super scaling here, but what I did end up doing is after I output all of this, so the entire movie, I actually took it back in. I sort of output as what you call an intermediate codec. In this case, the most common ones you would hear of are ProRes or DNxHR is another big one. I actually use one called Cineform, which is from GoPro. It's not as widely used. So if you're a professional editor, you wouldn't hear them using Cineform particularly, but it's a newer codec, and so it's actually a lot more efficient. I have a reasonable amount of hard drive space, but it's not infinite. So professional editors are using these massive RAID arrays that have terabytes and terabytes of space, and I have maybe a few terabytes of space, but I'm still a little bit picky about spending hundreds of gigabytes, that I may or may not have available just to get the best version out of a project. And so in this case, I output it in Cineform, and I think this is nearly 4 hours for an edit, and I think it ended up being a couple hundred gigabytes. And so from there, basically, that's not what I would release to people, because that's a lot of bandwidth for people to be downloading. Instead, what I would do is that was sort of an intermediate version where it's all baked in. You've got all that matte footage there. You've got the Blu-ray footage layered on top, so as high quality as I can get. And then what I would do is take that back in and actually run a second round of the Superscale on that footage to get it up to 4K. So I would actually have a second version that is just, that sort of compressed down to H.264 as a codec, sort of the most common supported codec out there really for a lot of things. And so I'd have one version of the movie that's at 1080p with a reasonable compression. I think it ended up being maybe 8 or 9 gigabytes for 4 hours, which is pretty reasonable. And then I did a second version where I brought that intermediate version back in, did another Superscale up to 4K, and then release that, and that would be somewhere, I want to say 30 to 40 gigabytes. So quite a bit bigger, but it's really 4 times the resolution. So that was sort of my workflow for this project, as far as me trying to get the best quality from that matte footage, from that IMAX kind of thing. And just as sort of a little background tidbit, whoever assembled this hybrid cut, which is really fine on its own, I believe it is only for the theatrical version footage, and I used the director's cuts. There's a bit of extra footage that I wanted to have in there, but this one really pulled from every source. I know there was some scenes that were released ahead of the movie, or maybe after it was out in theaters or something, but those had some footage that was, never released on the Blu-ray. It used trailers, where they promoted the IMAX portion, and they had some specific shots or specific scenes from the trailers that had these extended top and bottom footage. So they really pulled together every bit of footage to give it that, that extra open matte IMAX kind of experience. So I just decided, since I was going to be playing around with the aspect ratio in mind, I might as well grab a version of that to sort of enhance some of these scenes. I also cut in footage from the 2019 HBO miniseries, so that was in 16:9 anyway. I just knew that we're going to be bouncing around with aspect ratios. I might as well just embrace it and get the best version of Watchmen I could get. So anybody has any questions or requests for future guides, I'd be happy to take those in the comments, and hopefully have another video in the coming weeks. But thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.